Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to have you all with us. So many old and new friends. I'm Sean Sawyer, president of the Olana Partnership. And since there are some new friends, just a little bit about the Olana Partnership. We are a nonprofit educational organization and the cooperative partner of New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation at Olana State Historic Site in Hudson, New York. We emerged more than a century ago now, half a century, sorry, not a century, half a century. It's a good long time, from a group of private individuals and visionary preservationists who fought to save Olana from destruction in the 1960s. I want to acknowledge our current and past trustees who are here with us tonight. If you're a current or past trustee, just a little wave, or yes, there you are, wonderful people, yes. And I also want to give a special thank you to Mark Przorski, our Senior VP and Landscape Curator, who really is a brilliant standard bearer for Olana as a work of landscape art. Thomas Woltz's lecture this evening is an important milestone in our and Olana's evolution. It is the first public event leading to the opening of the Frederic Church Center for Art and Landscape later this year. Our goal in sponsoring this evening's event is to inspire you all to learn more about Olana and its future and to inspire a visit. And I invite you all, as I was saying as I was walking around outside, to come for a personal tour with Mark or myself. We're always available. We will make ourselves available. We would love to see you and have a chance to share what you're going to hear about tonight with you in person. Now, I am very pleased to introduce Victoria Johnson, Professor of Urban Policy and Planning at Hunter College of the City University of New York. Victoria earned her undergraduate degree in philosophy from Yale in 1991 and her PhD in sociology from Columbia in 2002. From 2015 to 2016, Victoria was a fellow at the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library, where she worked on her last book, American Eden, a New York Times notable book of 2018. American Eden was a finalist for the 2018 National Book Award in Nonfiction and the 2018 Los Angeles Times Book Award Prize in Biography. And it was just one of 2 finalists for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in History. From 2021 to 2022, Victoria held a Guggenheim Fellowship to support her work on a forthcoming biography of Frederic Church, entitled Glorious Country, which explores Church's life as an artist, landscape architect, designer, collector, world adventurer, and family man. Glorious Country will be the first ever narrative biography of Church for a general readership. It is slated for publication by Scribner in 2026, the bicentennial year of Church's birth, which will also be marked by exhibitions of Church's work at museums across the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Johnson.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to get to introduce 2 men I love, not the only 2 men I love, but 2 men I love very much and admire. That one, Thomas Woltz and Frederic Church. I first heard the mythical, almost magical word Olana when I was growing up in the South, very far away from the Hudson River. I heard it from my father, a native New Yorker who spoke the word with reverence. He spoke of Olana as a place that had been saved by visionary people galvanized by the tragic loss of Penn Station. My father also told me that he had first visited Olana in the early 1960s when he was stationed at West Point. He much preferred historic houses to Army duties. So on his time off, he would get on a little motorbike and explore the Hudson Valley. Riding up a hilly road one day, he found himself in front of a gorgeous villa. And it was about then that he realized he was on private property. Now, I know now, and I find it incredibly thrilling, that Frederic Church's daughter-in-law was still living there when my father rode up that road. He accidentally joined a decades-long procession of trespassers on the church property. Olana, as many of you here tonight will know, was created by a church near the town of Hudson, New York, beginning in the early 1860s. He was originally from Hartford, but he fell in love with the Hudson River during his artistic apprenticeship with the great British-American painter Thomas Cole at the village of Catskill. And many of you have surely been to the beautiful Thomas Cole National Historic Site at Catskill. Church was obsessed from childhood with nature and art. In his 20s, inspired by the writings of the great naturalist Alexander von Humboldt, he began traveling outside the United States on grueling and dangerous painting expeditions that took him to Andean volcanoes, to the Labrador Sea strewn with icebergs, to the Alps, Athens, Beirut, Constantinople, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Petra. But of all the beautiful places he saw around the globe, it was Olana, the house and landscape, that he called, quote, the center of the world. Church and his wife Isabel revered the human capacity to create beauty and meaning in art and artifacts. And in their extraordinary house, whose architecture was inspired by buildings he had seen in Ottoman Syria and works that he had read on Persian architecture. In this extraordinary house, they collected art and artifacts from around the world. And to show their faith in the promise of their own much younger nation, they juxtaposed these treasures with 18th and 19th century American furniture, paintings, sculptures, and decorative art. Olana became a kind of altar where the churches honored the creativity of all human cultures to create beauty. But Olana is, of course, both the house and the landscape. Over the course of 2 decades, on 250 acres of what Church called, quote, glorious country, that's where the title of my book comes from, he designed the exquisite landscape you'll hear about this evening. He reveled in the freedom that came with moving from the 2 dimensions of his paintings to the 3 dimensions of the land. He wrote a friend very happily in 1884, "I can make more and better landscapes in this way than by tampering with canvas and paint in the studio." Olana officially opened to the public in 1967, so my own first visit there took place legally, unlike my father's. It was in 2016 that a friend, Andrea Wolf, who is not coincidentally a brilliant biographer of Alexander von Humboldt, she invited me to accompany her on a tour with the Olana Partnership's president, Sean Sawyer, and vice president, Mark Pozorski. As we stood on Crown Hill looking back at the villa, my companions discussed the plans already underway for the restoration of Olana's landscape. It was that day, as I listened to them, that I first heard the mythical, almost magical name, Thomas Woltz. This name, too, was spoken with a certain reverence. I met Thomas himself soon afterward, and over the next months and years, as I conversed with him about landscapes and cities and public spaces, art, design, and history, I came to understand why so many people admire his vision and the work of his firm, Byrd Woltz Landscape Architects. Woltz is the principal and owner of NBW, which has offices in New York City, Charlottesville, Virginia, and Houston, Texas. Under his leadership, NBW has evolved into a firm of more than 50 people, and its work has been recognized with over 100 national and regional awards and has been published widely. The firm has worked in 30 states and 12 countries, and every year more than 30 million people make use of its parks worldwide. At present, Woltz is leading NBW in the design of major parks and botanic gardens and in the preservation design of cultural landscapes and historic sites across the country. The firm's 45 active projects range from a park in Houston that is nearly twice the size of Central Park to a 1-acre contemplative site for the descendants of the enslaved people of Thomas Jefferson at Monticello, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The firm's renowned research-based design process reveals at every site the lost and forgotten histories, both cultural and ecological, which they artfully weave into designs that reveal the authentic essence of a place. Thomas Woltz was educated at the University of Virginia in the fields of architecture, landscape architecture, fine art, and architectural history, and he holds master's degrees in landscape architecture and architecture. He serves on the boards of directors of the Cultural Landscape Foundation and the University of Virginia School of Architecture Foundation. In 2011, he was inducted into the American Society of Landscape Architects Council of Fellows, which is one of the highest honors you can achieve in the profession. In 2019, he was honored with the Land for People Award by the Trust for Public Land. He's telling me to stop. These many projects and accomplishments offer ample evidence that NBW was an inspired choice for the restoration of Olana's landscape. But now that I've spent the past several years immersed in the art and writings of Frederic Church, I can see more personal resonances between these two designers that make the one the perfect choice to restore the vision of the other. Church, like Woltz, brought to his work great seriousness of purpose and mind-boggling stamina. But he too leavened this intensity, like Woltz, with humility, wit, and a very lively sense of fun. Like Woltz, Church treasured the universal human capacity to add beauty to the world through art and design, both indoors and out. And like Woltz, Church loved the natural world passionately and believed that our capacity to be awed by nature is what makes us most deeply human. Happily for us, there is one major difference between these two men. Church was a man of few words, at least when it came to speaking about his art. But as you will hear tonight, Thomas Woltz is as eloquent a speaker about landscape as he is a designer of them. Thomas, it is my honor to welcome you. Thank you.
Oh, it's so sweet. Wow. Good evening, everyone. I assume my mic will enliven in moments, but you can probably hear me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It is really an honor. Gideon, I feel like this is the family reunion that I've always wanted, as opposed to the one that I would probably have if I ever attended one. It's very nice, and I hope you're available for my funeral, because that was insane. That was so, I really would love that, because that was very weep-worthy. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very touched that you're all here tonight, but we are here in service of Olana, this extraordinary masterpiece. And what is it that makes a masterpiece, I think, is the thing that we want to think about all the way through this evening. It is a mastermind that devoted himself, body and soul, all of his talents, all the time that he could spare, to making this incredible, complete work of art. I say complete work of art because from house to furnishings to textiles to paintings to landscape to carriage roads, every aspect was somehow under his control. Yes, he had magnificent collaborators coming from other fields of expertise. However, he was the mastermind of the masterpiece. Our job at Nelson Byrd Woltz, working with the Olana Partnership in the state of New York, was to pull those threads into the 21st century, tie them carefully to assure a resilient future. This resilient future is, yes, dependent in part on the generous support of the state, but it is mostly dependent on the care of us as citizens who understand that this masterpiece will only survive in perpetuity thanks to our support of it. This is the reality of most of the landscapes, the public landscapes that Nelson Byrd Woltz works on. We are in a generation where the gifts of private philanthropy are what actually sustain the vision of the public landscape. Our tax structure is not such that we can generously support these things without conservancies and partnerships that do this work. It is a beautiful place to stand between the engaged, knowledgeable citizen who is fighting for this place and the state who has the tools and mechanisms and the legal structures to make these things work. It's actually a phenomenal structure that I think other countries should actually look toward, because this triangle between design, the state, and philanthropy is a remarkable system that the United States has deployed to great effort, to great success, rather. I'm going to, after talking to Mark Przeworski a little bit about this talk, I'm going to do something a little strange, so I need you to buckle your seat belts. It won't be too jerky, but what we're going to do is, obviously this is about Olana, but what I wanted to do was a little bit set the stage for, and Mark thought this was an okay idea. He said it was a good idea, but I still only think it's an okay idea, but here we go. That I'll talk a little bit about what were the projects that MBW had done that prepared us to be able to take on Olana. So we'll talk about the Olana, the landscape stewardship plan. And then I'll talk about what were the cultural landscapes we were working on during Olana. And then we'll talk about the implementation that we've gone through. And then we'll talk about what has MBW done in the cultural landscapes since Olana. And then we'll end with the Frederic Church Center that's under construction right now. So the idea is to say, what brought us to Olana? How did Olana influence us during the work with Olana? And what has its influence been after Olana? So it's a way to do two things at once, to describe the body of cultural landscape work and give Olana's landscape work a context of what's happening in other parts of the country. So that's the structure, and I'll try to give you clues when we're about to take a sharp right turn. These are the partners I've already mentioned, the state and TOP. There's also the LA group that has served as local landscape architect of record. And of course, newer to the game, although it's now been, I think, 7 years, is Architecture Research Office, phenomenal partners who are the architects and authors of the Frederic Church Center. Sometimes the masterpiece is a spark, a glimpse, a sketch. I know this came afterwards, but I love to imagine church making this almost fantasy, this tiny, this is my very favorite church painting, is this tiny little sketch of an idea, of this castle that emerges from the rock. For several reasons, after I selected this spot as my home, I thought of hardly anything but planting trees, and had thousands and thousands of them set out on the southern and northern slopes. Remember, this was a deforested landscape, so for Church to make these intentional vistas, he had to plant the forest to hold the view. This, forensically, was what we were able to recreate. This is the masterpiece, a vintage photograph just after 1964, so it's not at its best, but it showed you clearly this. For anyone in the room who doesn't know Olana, I wanted to remember to acknowledge that. Here are some wonderful historic photographs. You can see the carriage road snaking up the hill. You can see the Ferme Ornée, the wagon house, in full flower, where unfortunately a parking lot got put. This is why we do cultural landscape research before we build. This is the house environs that have now been restored, and the mingled garden below the retaining wall with a very fancy dandy walking along the way. Just a glimpse of the detailing. This is a shot from the 1930s from the Library of Congress, just remembering the incredible craftsmanship of the house that was recognized by the state, meticulously restored as the landscape continued to miss its appropriate share of care. The decline and disrepair after 1964 led to these citizens stepping forward, a group of citizens stepping forward and saying, we will save this place. It was headed to auction, and as so many collections in America and around the world have suffered the collection, the work of someone, their entire life is shattered and dispersed. Thanks to this group of visionary individuals, someone stepped in, captured the entire collection, so clothing, letters, furniture, paintings hung in the place that he wanted, his studio, his paintbrushes, his palettes, the costumes that models wore in his paintings. It is all there. Unlike Monticello, which is another masterpiece of a mastermind, we have all the artifacts. I mean, this is something of a miracle. I think it's the only and most consistent collection of one individual's life's work in the United States, if not the world. So it takes on extraordinary meaning. The derelict nature of it, you can see the mingle garden and the retaining wall sort of falling apart, what was likely a small yew hedge grown into full-size trees. The disrepair was answered, the call was answered by some visionary people. We know a lot of we have the historic photographs of the Rockefeller family and many families stepping forward to do this. They recognized the power of Olana and stemmed the tide toward avoiding the auction and dispersing the collection. This is Olana as it was when we arrived. I suppose that was 2012 was one of our first visits. And you can see the entire studio is occluded by mostly invasive plants. All the grading has softened, still magnificent and enchanting, the house restored, but the landscape essentially invisible. Here you can see from above the condition of things in the grounds, and it was thanks to the Olana Partner leadership on the board that said, we must now engage in the landscape. And those board members are here tonight, and I'm forever grateful to them. One of them is my across-the-street neighbor. Miss Robin Key, a fabulous landscape architect in her own right who's given years of service. So now I want to talk about the journey that we went on together, but our journey to Olana. This is my wonderful team. 20 to 25% of our firm was born outside the United States from extremely diverse backgrounds around the world, bringing their skills and talents to supporting this work, in particular the stewardship of cultural resources. Just a word about how we work. We have this core of design of all landscape architects, and then three, I call them moons, circulating this gravitational pull of ecology. We have conservation biologists understanding the dynamics of the landscape, culture, understanding the cultural history of a site, and communications that helps with visualization and communication of these findings. Without understanding the ecology of the place and the culture of its place, we do not make a move. We must ask the land its story before we begin. And I think this is particularly important in historic sites, but I will say every piece of land has a story. There is no tabula rasa, there is no empty land. All land is full. Our job is to understand that, find it, and draw that essence upward into a design inspiration that is authentic to place. We've made no big mark at Olana, and we shouldn't, because we're listening very carefully. So I'm going to walk you through some of the process that we go through. This upper left is one of the DuPont estates, and we said, oh, well, we need to do this period of research. Like, we archive better than anyone, obviously. And I said, yes, you do, but I bet there's something. And in a closet on a shelf was a roll of drawings that were instrumental in unpacking the Crown and Shield Garden. So it's amazing what this sort of instigation of outsiders coming in to do research can actually lead to. We look for old maps and surveys and deeds, and here you can see conservation biologists doing biodiversity surveys, historic photographs. All of this information influences the design. So, moving toward Olana, what were the projects that prepared MBW to take on this extraordinary commission? One was a 2,600-acre stewardship plan for Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's masterpiece. This helped us get in the mind of a visionary who spent his life implementing farm, forest, architecture, gardens. All of these things came from Jefferson and his collaborators and his enslaved people who made his dream come true. I put in Eastwood Hill Arboretum. This is a 100-year-old, the National Arboretum of New Zealand. It's an extraordinary collection, and we were hired to do a 100-year master plan. That helped me think about Olana as the permanence of this landscape that must go on in perpetuity. It shifted the way I thought from let's solve this problem or this problem to what is the bigger mission, and this became an arboreal arc holding plants threatened in the Northern Hemisphere in safety in the Southern Hemisphere. We also worked on Cornwall Park in Auckland, the largest urban park in Auckland, New Zealand. And here you see, similar to Olana, a massive orchard and working farm that was the estate of an individual who left this land to become a public park. So now, back to, so that was our prep, that was the before, we're gonna turn. Now we've been hired for the Olana Strategic Landscape Design Plan. This is the full team. I've mentioned everyone except Susan Turner Associates, a cultural landscape historian in Baton Rouge, working with the important work of Bob Toole, who had done a cultural landscape report earlier, a few years prior to our engagement. And then Camoin Associates, economic analysis and economic planners, and Zach Wolf, agricultural consultant. This is the result of, this is the reconstruction plan of 1890 to 1900. Bob Toole had done extraordinary work that we could build on to add to it our cultural landscape report. This is the timeline that Susan Turner helped research all of these amazing facts, and then we illustrated this timeline. So I'll just zoom you through a few of the key moments. To the memory of Cole, 1848, Church becomes the first student of Thomas Cole, then completes Heart of the Andes, 1859. He marries Isabel Carnes, and they move to the new hillside land and begin a gentleman's farm by building Cozy Cottage, 1870s. Then we have spring of 1864. He tallies his tree planting at several thousand. So imagine arriving to this empty landscape and reforesting it to create views. This was instrumental in working with the state when we actually wanted to clear forest to restore those views, because rightfully so, it's against the law to cut down forest in state parks. But every now and then, the cultural landscape trumps the ecological, particularly when the ecological is actually a depauperate ecosystem. The Cozy Cottage, he builds a new barn, remodels the old barn, and re-roofs the ice house, 1867. 1869 to 70, collaborating with Calvert Vaux to design the main house. The farm is essentially complete by 1870. 1873 onward, he develops a landscape composition that combines agricultural acreage, parkland, woods, and water into a single unified entity. Frankly, I have to deal with this all the time, the invisibility of landscape. If there's ever been an intentional composition, it is this one. However, it fell to ruin because of the invisibility of landscape to most of the public. If it's green, it's good, probably just fine. We don't need to fund landscape because it can take care of itself. The Olana Partnership and the state working together with us knew this was not the case. It was a matter of funding and time. They had saved the house, which was badly imperiled, and now it was our time together to save the landscape and make it visible once more. 1873, he develops, the landscape composition. 1889, the arrival of young evergreens. He's planting a slope of the South Lawn terraces with trees. He's constantly working on this masterpiece. He returns from Mexico in poor health and dies on April 7th, the same day my father passed away. The Metropolitan Museum mounts first retrospective of his work. Early to mid-19th century, we see it falling into neglect, and then by 1966, we see Olana saved from auction that I mentioned earlier. These are just a few highlights of this very complex and comprehensive timeline of information, but it gives you a sense of what came before we began the master plan. In 1977, this extraordinary moment of stopping the nuclear power plant, this is really establishing Olana and Church's legacy as an environmentalist, to fight for the power of a cultural landscape as a viewshed, to fight for its own preservation. 1992, works with Scenic Hudson, the Columbia Land Conservancy, Open Spaces Institute, and neighbors to preserve the historic viewshed. To date, more than 2,000 acres have been preserved, and that is now upward of that. We're now at 3,000 acres preserved. And then Toole in 1996, and then 2002. The house was restored in 2001 to 2006, and then we began our work in 2011 to today, and then, as I said, I'll end with the Frederic Church Center. I wanted to add this because the next chapter is Victoria Johnson's Glorious Country that will appear in spring of 2026, and this is her most recent book, American Eden. But I see this as the next important chapter in Olana's timeline. So for those of you who do not know, this is Olana 9G on the Hudson River. One of our early observations that became pivotal, I'm just going to give you a few highlights of the Strategic Landscape Master Plan. When we began, everyone wanted to see the house, came to the house, drove straight to the house. You could practically put your bumper on the laundry door at the back of the house. You really just drove right in. And there was no way to deliver to the public the actual experience that Church wanted you so desperately to have. He wanted to introduce your body, your mind, and your heart to the landscape, and you would eventually arrive at the house via carefully calculated experiences through the carriage roads. He also had the Fer Mornay, key vista points, the lake. So all of these constructs that he wanted you to enjoy, and the public's like whizzing past to get to the laundry room door. So I thought, we need to disperse this energy and invite people to understand the complexity of Olana. We also looked carefully at historic land use, noticed the edge of forest, open meadow and field, and then over time, this had become dramatically reforested and closed in, losing major views and losing the diversity of this landscape, the farm entirely lost. So having the ability to visit the lake, the farm, and the house, and at least put that in people's mind that there are multiple destinations, but then layer onto that other places you could explore. So these key views were a design element, and again, they had been lost. So one of our analyses was, if we want to explain to people before they get into Olana where they are, we need to hold their hand for just a moment. Just give us a moment, right when you arrive. This analysis was what helped us find a place. For heaven's sakes, we can't build in the viewshed, right? We can't build the Frederic Church Center in a visible place after having fought for no one to build in the viewshed. Guess who can't do it above all? And so we used this kind of analysis. This is slope analysis. So red is very steep, yellow is steep-ish, green is level-ish, so that we could accommodate a space. We overlaid that with what is and is not visible from the house. So this sort of magical layering up of maps started to reveal an area that was level enough, not visible from the house, and on a usable slope. It's also just after you come off 9G. It all sounds so logical, but it took us all like ages to decide where to put this thing. I felt like. Anyway, this analysis helped us understand where to locate the Frederic Church Center. We also had to deal with things like traffic and buses that Church was never expecting to have. There was a debate about this was Church's preferred entry, the North Road, that would bring you all the way up to the house, around the drive to the tower, and then to the carriage drop-off. This is one of those interesting things. Okay, you think Thomas loves this like authenticity of history, so he's probably going to want to restore the North Road. Well, every now and then, the restoration of the authentic experience actually destroys the artifact. And this is one of those cases. To make the North Road wide enough to accommodate the traffic, two-way traffic, fire trucks, all of the regulations would have destroyed this beautiful carriage road. So we're keeping the use of the state entry, coming to the Frederic Church Center, and then inviting people to come to the farm, up to the house, and back down to the entrance. So you use your car to arrive at these three places. I mean, this is part of the adaptation of historic sites to the 21st century. Very difficult work. So figuring out universal accessibility and the appropriate parking. But this way, we distribute people throughout the site. If you arrive at the Frederic Church Center and you can't get in the house for an hour, you have many things to go see. So you're explained how to use this place before you come. This was the resulting or final master plan drawing showing the completely restored Olana with the Frederic Church Center located here. The master plan, the comprehensive plan, yielded several major projects: the Frederic Church Center, the reworking of the house and environs, and the restoration of the farm. We have completed the house environs almost. We're under construction on the Olana, the Frederic Church Center, and we have great work to do on the farm, so we'll be calling you. So now, swing back. I wanted to talk a little bit about during Olana, this extraordinary experience working with wonderful people in this deep understanding of one site. We were working on some other projects, and I could feel how Olana was influencing our thinking in these other sites. We were doing the Peggy Guggenheim Sculpture Garden in Venice, working at the Mount, where Edith Wharton's niece, Beatrix Farren, had designed a potager that we actually had the drawings that she had done, but archaeology revealed it wasn't built the way it was drawn, and it was actually built according to a hand sketch. So these are all fascinating things. I really have gotten to the point in my life that I want a bumper sticker that I live by that's, "Have you hugged your archaeologist today?" Because if you do anything without an archaeologist, shame on you. It really is one of the most exciting things to see what they discover in the land, and then you get to work with it. I'm not scared of whatever they find. I think this was a particularly exciting project of taking this and reimagining Beatrix Farren's potager, but in a way that a nonprofit that needs to host events, earn its own income, can use half of it as an event lawn, repurposing the carriage house for events, and still have a satisfying potager with pleached trees and a full orchard that is a parking orchard. So using our art to deal with and embrace elegantly the realities of 21st century visitation. I love this kind of stuff. I just think it's so exciting. And then, of course, while we were working on Olana, we had work at Montpelier. This was another thing that I think we were influenced by Olana, where at the very beginning, we had a convening of the state, the Olana Partnership, Charles Birnbaum from the Cultural Landscape Foundation, and I facilitated a workshop. And we sort of vowed, it was a Sunday afternoon, can you imagine, in the carriage? It was a Sunday afternoon, and everyone came together, and we really vowed to work lovingly together toward a common purpose. And since that day, so much has changed, and I thought, let's try that at Montpelier. So we had constitutional law theoreticians, horticulturists, farmers, conservation biologists, historians. Andrea Wolf came from London for this, and we gathered 18 global scholars to talk about an audacious idea. What would a constitutional amendment for the environment look like? And where better to discuss that than in the room where James Madison wrote the bulk of the US Constitution. It gave everyone chills to be standing in that room and start to debate what would this look like. So again, Olana was quite influential. Another example was the master plan for Filoli, part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Another example where the Bourne estate and gardens and farm, all of these were components of an intentional composition, not dissimilar from Frederic Church's Olana. So back to the landscape plan is complete, fundraising has been going apace, and it's time to start implementing Olana. So this is my second switch back to Olana with landscape implementation. The North Meadow restoration I wanted to mention, the view was very much lost. It had been reforested. I think that is I and Mark Streeter, the senior principal in our New York office who has led this project for 12 years. This is a piece of barbed wire that we found in the trees. So we were looking for where was the edge of churches' afforestation. So you had trees, sometimes they grow to similar scale, but the rings would tell you that some are new and some are quite old. So you can actually tell where that line was. And when you see barbed wire grown through a fence, you know that was the edge of where livestock was kept to keep the meadow open in the 19th century. So this kind of forensic landscape, going tree to tree in a big forest, and to try to find where was the historic view. So being very faithful to that, not being careless about this work. This is an overlay of Frederic Church's landscape sort of survey with an aerial of actual Olana to try to figure out where these lines and roads might have been. So this helped guide us. So we're really walking around with these old, highly inaccurate plans, but saying, well, he must have been sort of close. And then a very intentional replanting of warm season grass meadows and marginal species around the perimeter of the forest to have a sustainable, biodiverse native grassland of Hudson ecosystems. I have a friend who was not able to be here tonight, but he lives on Mount Merino. I really want him to be a donor of Olana, so maybe it's a good thing he didn't come. He is a doctor who's lived on Mount Merino for years, and he dated my sister all through college. So he's tortured me since I was 13 years old. And he had a house party, and I'm constantly saying, please go to Olana, please get involved with Olana. And so the day this happened, he texted me, he said, I took my house party to Olana, love your work. So I was like, all right, jerk. Wonderful, wonderful guy who does absolutely love Olana, but this very soon came to look like this very sustainable, resilient ecological landscape restoration. And this is what that view now looks like. It's very exciting to see this transformation. To me, this is heroic work, but it's very quiet. No one would ever know anyone was involved. But we're back to and I love this image of a plein air painter doing exactly what I think he would love to see happening here. Crown Hill Viewshed, I'll quickly talk about that. This is Crown Hill that was completely occluded. Saratoga Associates oversaw the clearing of this. And this is the view from Crown Hill. Obviously, he's foregrounding the working farm of the Fair Mornay with the house at the top of the hill. This is an absolute intentional composition that had been completely lost. There it is coming into its beautiful, beautiful plantings here. This is the location of the parking lot that was put in just, when you don't have a cultural landscape report, when you don't have the knack or the understanding of landscape. This is why Charles Birnbaum wrote the Department of the Interior Standards for Preservation of Cultural Landscapes, so that people would look and see and not put a parking lot right where the vegetable garden was. So, one more viewshed to restore, the painting studio. So this was the view when we began from the painting studio. This was his painting of that view. So how exciting to go forensically to his very paintings and say, we're rebuilding the view according to the intent of the artist. And so here again, I mean, you must think, Thomas just cuts down trees all the time, but trees for a cause. Anyway, this is the reseeding. This is Mark overseeing the staking and planting of trees, low flowering trees and native shrubs all along this hillside for beauty and stabilization. There it is, planted and looking much more like it would have looked in Church's day. And you can see this is the steepness of these plantings to stabilize the slope. And this is what we get to see now, the house on its rocky outcrop with a stable vegetation on the hillside. And there it is, I think, last fall. So again, a very subtle work, huge amount of work, and thank you to the Olana Partnership and the state for believing, to achieve back to the original vision. So now you see the hilltop. I wanted to talk a bit about the ferme ornée at this point at the base of it's just off the screen here. We'll talk about the restoration of the ferme ornée, a very open landscape, a large-scale production. And so we proposed first to move the parking lot into this area behind the dam of the lake and screen it with planting outside of the historic landscape. Restore the first garden, the cottage garden, the small orchard, the large orchard, and the meadows. So it's an ambitious plan. It will take time, but I think it's one of the most exciting ways to bring people back for constant and repeat visitation, to come for workshops and visitation at the farm. The parking lot. So this is where it was when we began our work. You can see that is the historic garden behind the wagon house. So we proposed to move it here, and then we're free to restore this. We also did a kind of invisible project of fixing all the drainage here because it was a bit swampy in the back. I think that was our very first, we were hired to fix the swamp behind the wagon house. This is it, fixing that drainage, and then this is it with the meadow grown back in. So it does take a huge amount of work to sustain and restore these ecological landscapes. This was a lot of fun working with archaeology to discover the corn crib, an earthen cellar, a granary, ice house, sawmill, and the breezy farmhouse, and how we could repurpose these structures for tool sheds, storage, to actually reactivate the entire working farm. We have enough evidence and photographs that we could, according to the historic preservation standards, we could rebuild all of these structures. So you would feel what it was like to be in the historic farm. This is a very exciting project on the books for the coming future. So this will be a really wonderful place to visit. This is the new parking lot being built. It's now screened and in place, so it is now freed up for the vegetable garden to happen. I don't know what these children are running from, screaming, crying, away from the parking lot. So now to the house environs, this sort of district right around the house, and this happens. Land moves. Land melts. Big rainstorms, and it's slowly, constantly moving. And every now and then, you have to sharpen it back up. It's like when you leave your cake out in the rain. Sorry, I don't know why I mentioned. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the laugh. So, does this photo make my asphalt look big? I mean, no shortage of gravel and asphalt spreading all over the historic grounds. So we needed to rein this in. And here's how we did it. So the idea of taking all the asphalt that was unnecessary, putting it on a diet, and then using the crushed red shale as the sort of red thread that allowed you to understand the historic intent. So anything red was original and historic to church. Anything in gray is a requirement of the 21st century. So watch this. This is the carriage road coming up from the North Road. So when it crosses the asphalt road, like inlaid wood, it is cut into the asphalt. So you feel the dominance of the carriage road over the 21st century. So you see this careful incision. This is the bus turnaround and universal accessibility parking. So everyone now takes the correct route over the retaining wall in the mingled garden, up to see the tower, and then to the carriage road, and behind to the carriage house. So it was a way of carefully inserting and telling that story very intuitively and subtly. Again, these are a lot of very subtle moves. And then restoring the carriage road, getting rid of the giant yews here, and bringing back a shrub border, and then restoring the wall below. So we now have, once again, the arrival experience as church intended. Here you're seeing that road sweeping up and the arrival point at the front door, and just the stunning, I didn't really need this photo, but we just have to look at it. It's just, I could stare at it all night. The restoration of the mingled garden. This, working with Silman, who did these very meticulous repair documents of where Silman Engineering, understanding where the wall was stable, where it needed to be restored, and leading to very careful work of restructuring the stone wall. This is the wall complete, and then the Mingle Garden was replanted. This is a ballet performance, not someone so moved by the garden that they, although it could be, I mean, maybe. And then, of course, plein air painting below the Mingle Garden. It's just, this photograph makes me so happy. And here you're seeing the newly sharpened grading that Church had done, these perfect terraced plinth that the house sat upon as it transitioned to the more rougher meadow, and the shrubs that are stabilizing the bank and allowing the view from the studio. So my last switchback since working on the landscape plan, what has MBW been doing in the world of cultural landscapes? This is a very moving and powerful project for us. This was the memorial site, or a contemplative site, for the descendants of the enslaved people of Thomas Jefferson. And this was Juneteenth. That's my same head right there, at this site. And it's within a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So bringing truer narratives into historic preservation is essential to our work, and more every day. Particularly engaged and interested with Native American history. We're working for the Caddo Nation, are building relationships with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee. And these stories coming to light is, I think, part of the moral imperative of landscape architecture in the 21st century. This I put in because it, like Church, is a complete vision of the Rothko Chapel, and it also is another project that we're doing with Architecture Research Office. They have completely restored the Rothko Chapel and brought a whole new, magnificent, nuanced experience with the paintings. But like the work I've just discussed at Olana, you don't necessarily see that they've been there. And that is modesty and genius holding hands. And that's what ARO does in extraordinary ways. So we're building this new campus. We just were at a groundbreaking 3 weeks ago in Houston for the next phase of this work. This is the Nina Simone childhood home. This is an extremely modest 1/4 acre that we're now restoring so that when you go there, you understand Eunice Wayman's childhood in Tryon, North Carolina. And then at a very large scale, Middleton Place Plantation, another vision of a family that is working landscape, gardens, agriculture, and an extraordinary collection. The last one I'm sharing that opened just 2 years ago is the Machikomako. This is the first, this is a bit hard to believe, it's the first park in the state of Virginia to acknowledge Native American heritage and history. When you think from Jamestown forward, 1608 to today, we have yet to really acknowledge the Native American history of this landscape. So this, working with the elders, creating our office designed this abstraction of a longhouse with their communication and support. So not us designing something for them, but rather with them. And then creating this landscape that starts to tell the story of their people for the last, I think, 16,000 years. Now, back to Olana. This is my last chapter. You have this extraordinary landscape. How do we enhance the visitor experience by giving them wonderful information, introducing them to Frederic Church and his genius, so that they understand that they're walking through a masterpiece the minute they come onto this landscape? And that begins the Frederic Church Center. So this is its location that I've shown you previously. I wanted to just put up a few of the projects that, there's so many, but some that I really love, of Architecture Research Office, ARO. This is the phase 2 of Rothko Chapel that I just mentioned that we're doing. Donald Judd's home and studio in Soho. If you visited it, once again, it's just extraordinary modesty and brilliance, carefully allowing us to experience Judd's space while meeting all the criteria of the 21st century of archival, heating and air conditioning and controls, and you see nothing. Like, it is so exquisitely and modestly done. The Dia Chelsea, of course, the Greenwood Cemetery Education and Welcome Center, and the Vilcek Foundation. So back to this drawing, I'm going to take you right here, and this is that analysis that I had mentioned, just to recite us. We looked at several different sites that met the criteria and settled on this one. This is just a glimpse of how we work, many options, we don't say here's what you need, we say here are 5 ways we could meet what you need, and let's work together to refine these options. This was the final option. You come off 9G, you arrive here, parking, bus drop-off, parking through, you come into the Frederic Church Center, and then a sort of elliptical amphitheater stepping up the hillside, because this has to be nestled to not be seen. But then you have this, of course, a landscape experience is what we must give people when they arrive at Olana. So you walk up to this intersection of the carriage road, and there you have the splendid view across the lake. So your first introduction is, oh, I stand at the edge of a masterpiece. This is the rendering of the Olana Center. You can see that little terrace. This is where the carriage road and landscape tours will pick up. This is the GEM, the electric vehicle that they use. You can see the parking and the center and this sort of amphitheater space. This is the arrival center. You can see the terraces and walking in. A multi-purpose space, orientation, restrooms, that sort of thing. This is looking from inside the multi-purpose space out into this small terrace and up to this point where you have the view. So this building really is one with the forest, but the color palette is coming from Olana, looking at the barns and structures and outbuildings of Olana. It's a very contemporary interpretation of the historic structures found across the site, something ARO is uniquely skilled at doing. So this is the view looking down that seating into this space where small performances or concerts could occur, and gatherings inside lectures in the multi-purpose space. I'll show you a couple of construction shots because this will be finished in the early fall. And so this is where we are now with Charlotte Barrows has been leading this construction project, the design and construction, getting these giant stones perfectly made and installed. And you can see the building coming along apace. Charlotte, do you know when was this photograph? Last week. Thank you. And this is what you once got, and this is what you'll get once again. So this is that sort of arrival point after your experience of learning something about Frederic Church. And we hope that people leaving this site will come to understand this man. I have made about 1 3/4 miles of roads this season, opening entirely new and beautiful views. I can make more and better landscapes in this way, as Victoria quoted, than by tampering with canvas and paint in the studio. This reveals the powerful intent of this man to build and live in, inhabit and breathe a masterpiece for all of us to enjoy. It has been an extraordinary honor to get to follow in his footsteps for my whole team, the Olana team, but also I would say this project has resonated with everyone at Nelson Byrd Woltz. Everyone is keenly aware of this project as it sits within a body of work of cultural landscapes. These sites not only tell us who someone was, but they tell us who we have been and who we can be as a civilization. His dedication to the arts is what sparks and enlivens the humanity in all of us. And when I go to Olana, I hope for a better world every visit. Thank you so much for coming this evening.